For more than 5 decades, the Queen of Funk had outlasted an industry that had buried countless stars before they ever reached true greatness. She had lived through political upheaval, endured 3 painful marriages, fought a very public battle with addiction, and watched an entire generation of performers build careers using pieces of her unmistakable voice without ever asking permission. By the age of 73, Chaka Khan wasn't chasing approval, protecting a reputation, or trying to prove she still belonged. She had already earned her place in music history. And that's exactly what made the next few moments so unforgettable. What unfolded inside the Watch What Happens Live clubhouse would soon explode into one of Bravo's most talked-about confrontations. Andy Cohen, the king of uncomfortable questions and celebrity chaos, was about to learn a lesson he never expected. Some icons refuse to play by television rules. Some legends don't dodge difficult questions. They answer with complete confidence, stare straight into your eyes, remind you exactly who they are, and leave you speechless before walking away without a second thought. But what happened next changed everything. Before we get into this unforgettable showdown, make sure you subscribe and leave a comment below, because this is the moment the Queen of Funk reminded the entire entertainment world why that crown has always belonged to her. That Thursday evening, the atmosphere inside Bravo's clubhouse felt different from the moment the cameras began rolling. Even the production staff had been warned that this wouldn't be an ordinary celebrity interview. Chaka Khan rarely accepted late-night television invitations anymore. She simply didn't have to. With 10 Grammy Awards, a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and a legacy that had inspired powerhouse artists from Whitney Houston to Beyoncé, she had already accomplished what most performers only dream about. Yet there she was, calmly taking her seat across from Andy Cohen as every eye in the room focused on what might happen next. Andy welcomed her with his usual energetic grin. "Welcome to the clubhouse, Miss Chaka Khan." The audience erupted into applause as he continued, calling her the Queen of Funk and admitting he'd wanted her on the show for years. Chaka answered with a polite smile, but there was something unmistakable behind it. It was the expression of a woman who had spent decades reading people before they ever revealed themselves. Then she looked directly at Andy and said, "I've been watching you, Andy. I know exactly how this show works. You get people drinking, loosen them up, and before they know it, they've said something they'll regret." The room burst into laughter, and Andy seemed amused by her honesty. Leaning into the joke, he asked if they could get her a drink, and wanted to know what she'd be having that night. Without missing a beat, Chaka answered with a calm, unwavering voice. "Water." She paused just long enough for the silence to settle. "I've been sober for years, but don't let that stop you from doing whatever it is you do." In that instant, the mood shifted. The first crack appeared in Andy's confident rhythm. A guest who stayed completely clear-headed couldn't be nudged into careless answers or pushed toward the kind of viral television his show thrived on. Still, Andy wasn't known for backing away from uncomfortable situations. He quickly steered the conversation toward her legendary career, praising her 50 years in music, mentioning the celebrated Queen's tour alongside Patti LaBelle, Gladys Knight, and Stephanie Mills, before bringing up her upcoming album, her first new release since 2002. Chaka nodded. "Echoes of my journey," she said, her unmistakable raspy voice filling the room. "It took 23 years because I wanted to make sure I actually had something worth saying." Andy acknowledged the long gap between albums, but there was a subtle edge hidden beneath his words that didn't escape her attention. Then came the question that instantly changed the temperature inside the studio. Looking directly across at her, he asked whether, with so much having changed in the music industry, she still felt relevant in today's world. The words lingered in the air like a challenge no one expected him to make. Audience members shifted uneasily in their seats while crew members behind the cameras exchanged uncertain looks. Andy Cohen had just questioned whether the Queen of Funk still mattered. Chaka didn't hesitate for even a second. "Relevant?" she replied with complete certainty. "Baby, I was relevant before you ever arrived, and I'll still be relevant long after this little show disappears. The real question isn't whether I'm relevant. The real question is whether this industry still has enough taste to recognize greatness when it's standing right in front of it. The room fell into an awkward silence as Andy's confident smile tightened ever so slightly. He wasn't accustomed to guests who challenged him so directly or dismantled his questions so effortlessly. Most celebrities came ready to laugh, play along, answer messy questions, and join the show's drinking games. Chaka Khan had arrived with an entirely different agenda, and this was only the beginning. Chaka Khan clearly hadn't come to play by anyone else's rules. Andy forced a smile, trying to steer the interview back into familiar territory. Fair enough, he said. Let's play a little game. You know this one. Plead the fifth. I'll ask you 3 questions. You have to answer at least 2 honestly, and you can skip one if you want. Sound good? Chaka settled deeper into her chair, calmly folding her arms as if she had already seen where this was going. Then she looked him straight in the eye. I don't plead the fifth. Never have. I say exactly what I mean, and I stand on every word. So go ahead. Ask whatever you want. The confidence in her voice immediately caught Andy's attention. From his perspective, this was television gold. A guest willing to answer anything usually meant bigger headlines, more viral moments, and another unforgettable episode. But what he didn't realize was that this conversation was about to slip completely out of his control. Andy wasted no time. First question. You've been very outspoken about Kanye West sampling. Through the fire for Through the Wire. You once said he made you sound like a chipmunk. If he called you tomorrow and apologized, would you forgive him? Chaka let out a laugh, but there wasn't a trace of amusement behind it. Forgive him? For what exactly? For taking my voice, speeding it up until it barely sounded human, and turning my work into something I never approved. For building on my artistry without showing enough respect to ask the right way. Right now, that man has far bigger things to worry about than whether I forgive him. He needs to make peace with himself before he starts asking for mine. Andy nodded with an almost satisfied grin. So, that's a no. The exchange had delivered exactly the kind of soundbite he loved. But the next question would push things much further. Question 2, Andy continued. Whitney Houston's version of I'm Every Woman became one of the biggest songs of the 90s. Be honest. Has it ever bothered you that her version became more famous than yours? The atmosphere inside the clubhouse changed instantly. Chaka's expression lost every hint of playfulness. Her eyes became fixed, and when she spoke, her voice carried a quiet seriousness that silenced the room. Andy, let me tell you something about Whitney Houston. I knew that young woman before the world ever understood who she was. She was just 14 when our paths crossed. Her mother, Sissy, sang background for me. I watched Whitney grow into the extraordinary artist everyone later fell in love with. So when you ask whether I'm bothered by her success, you're asking the wrong question. She leaned forward, never breaking eye contact. What bothers me is watching people try to invent conflict where none ever existed. Whitney and I shared that song because we shared love and respect. We performed it together. She honored me every chance she got. Now she's no longer here to speak for herself, and somehow we're sitting here pretending there was a feud just because it makes better television. That's the part that bothers me. For the first time all night, Andy looked genuinely uncomfortable. The interview wasn't following the script he had imagined. Instead of answering his questions, Chaka was exposing the questions themselves. He quickly tried to soften his approach. I wasn't suggesting there was any rivalry. I was only asking how you felt about the cover. Chaka didn't let him off the hook. My feelings? She replied, her voice growing firmer. My feelings are that Whitney Houston had one of the greatest voices this world will ever hear. My feelings are that the music business failed her in more ways than people care to admit. And my feelings are that I'm exhausted by interviewers who keep trying to pit black women against one another because they think conflict sells. The audience didn't make a sound. Even behind the cameras, the crew stood motionless. This no longer resembled the light-hearted celebrity interviews the show was famous for. Something much more powerful was unfolding right in front of them. Sensing the tension, Andy rushed toward his final question. Let's move on. You once said Mary J. Blige, quote, messed up your song Sweet Thing, and that her vocals were flat. Do you still stand by those comments? Chaka let out a short, knowing laugh. And there it is, she said. Exactly what I expected. You want another headline. You want me criticizing another black woman so you can slice it into clips, throw it on social media, and let people argue about it for days. That's the game, isn't it? Andy immediately defended himself, but his confidence had noticeably faded. I'm only asking about comments you've already made publicly. Chaka answered without hesitation. Yes, I said what I said. And Mary and I talked about it like grown women. We're good. We're family. Real sisters can disagree, tell each other the truth, and still have love for one another. What you don't seem to understand is that not every disagreement has to become entertainment. Some relationships are stronger than your headlines. As those words landed, Andy's face visibly tightened, and for the first time that evening, he looked like the one being interviewed. That's not a fair assessment, Andy replied, trying to steady the conversation. I've built real relationships with so many of the women who've appeared on Bravo. Chaka's expression hardened instantly. Relationships, she repeated, almost in disbelief. You've built an entire empire around putting women in situations where they're encouraged to drink, argue, and tear each other apart in front of millions of people. You've made a fortune turning conflict into entertainment. So don't stand there and tell me this is about relationships. Her words hit the room like a shockwave. Audible gasps rippled through the audience, and for perhaps the first time in the history of Watch What Happens Live, Andy Cohen looked genuinely caught off guard. He quickly tried to defend himself, though the confidence that usually carried him through difficult interviews was beginning to fade. I think that's a pretty unfair description of what we do. The Real Housewives franchise celebrates strong women. Chaka let out a dry laugh that carried no amusement at all. Celebrates them? No. You celebrate the chaos. You reward the biggest arguments, the loudest voices, and the messiest moments because that's what keeps people watching. Let's not pretend it's something more meaningful than that. The playful atmosphere that normally defined the show had completely disappeared. Andy quietly placed his wine glass on the table and leaned forward. Look, Chaka, I invited you here to celebrate your incredible career, talk about your new album, and have an enjoyable conversation. If you weren't interested in participating in the spirit of the show, then I'm honestly not sure why you agreed to come. Chaka didn't hesitate. I came because your team told me we'd be talking about my music, she answered firmly. Instead, you've spent this entire interview trying to get me to criticize other artists. You asked about Kanye. You asked about Whitney. You asked about Mary. Tell me, when exactly were you planning to ask about the work I've spent my life creating? Andy answered almost automatically. We were getting there. But even he didn't sound convinced by his own explanation. Chaka shook her head. No, you weren't. Because my life's work doesn't create the kind of headlines you're looking for. I've spent 50 years building a legacy, earned 10 Grammy Awards, been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and somehow the question you think people care about is whether I'm jealous of Whitney Houston. That's what you reduced my career to. The room grew even quieter, and this is where things got interesting. Realizing he was losing control of the interview, Andy tried to redirect the conversation. Okay, then let's talk about the new album. Echoes of My Journey. Tell us what inspired it. But Chaka wasn't ready to move on. No, she said calmly, I want to stay right here because this actually matters. You have one of the biggest platforms on television. Millions of people tune in to watch this show. Imagine what you could do if you spent that time celebrating artists instead of constantly trying to manufacture conflict. Imagine using that platform to elevate people instead of pushing them toward uncomfortable moments just because they're entertaining. Andy attempted another defense, though it came out noticeably weaker. That's really not what this show is about. Chaka immediately challenged him. Then tell me what it is about. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you enjoy watching people embarrass themselves. You ask questions designed to make them uncomfortable. You hand them drinks to lower their guard. Then later everyone acts surprised when they say something they wish they hadn't. She slowly gestured around the entire set. Look at this place. The couches, the cocktails, the relaxed atmosphere. It's all designed to make guests forget they're sitting in front of television cameras. That's not an accident. It's a setup. And after everything I've experienced in this business, I know exactly what a trap looks like. Andy fell silent for several seconds, visibly searching for a way to regain control. When he finally spoke again, there was a sharper edge in his voice. You know, Chaka, I've interviewed hundreds of guests over the years, musicians, actors, politicians, and somehow they've all managed to enjoy themselves without accusing me of running some kind of exploitation machine. Chaka met his stare without flinching. Most of those people haven't spent 50 years watching this industry use people until there's nothing left. Most of them are still trying to become more famous. They're still hoping people like you will help their careers. I don't need that anymore. I already accomplished everything I came here to accomplish. Andy leaned forward. Then why agree to come on the show at all? Chaka answered without hesitation. Because I wanted to find out whether the man sitting across from me was different from the version I've watched on television. I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt, and tonight you answered that question for me. Andy looked directly at her. So who do you think I am? Chaka paused, studying him for a long moment before speaking. I think you're someone who built a career by feeding off other people's conflicts. I think you're very good at figuring out exactly which buttons to press until someone finally reacts. And I think somewhere along the way, you've forgotten the difference between genuine entertainment and exploiting people for ratings. Andy's jaw tightened. I think that's incredibly unfair. I've spent years giving artists a platform. I've introduced audiences to people who may never have received that kind of exposure otherwise. Chaka calmly corrected him. No. You've given a platform to people willing to perform the version of themselves your show expects. There's a difference. The moment someone refuses to play along, refuses to give you the drama you're hoping for, you have no idea what to do next. Then, with complete composure, she rose from the couch and carefully adjusted her flowing kaftan. Just like right now, you're uncomfortable because I'm not giving you the interview you planned. I'm not drinking. I'm not attacking anybody. I'm not creating the viral moment you wanted. And that's exactly what's throwing you off. Andy immediately responded, I'm not uncomfortable, but his voice betrayed the confidence his words tried to project. Chaka simply nodded. Maybe you should be. Because more and more people are beginning to recognize what's really happening. They're realizing that so much of reality television isn't reality at all. It's carefully managed manipulation presented as entertainment. And one day people will look back on this era and wonder why everyone accepted it for so long. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. Cameras hurried to follow her every step while Andy jumped to his feet, desperately trying to stop the interview from slipping completely out of his hands. Behind the scenes, members of the production crew exchanged anxious glances as the entire broadcast threatened to unravel in real time. For the first time in the 17-year history of Watch What Happens Live, the unthinkable was happening. No guest had ever stood up and walked out before the show was over. The entire production had entered completely unfamiliar territory. Chaka, wait, Andy called after her, the urgency impossible to hide. We still have 15 minutes left. We haven't even talked about the Queen's tour or your new single. She stopped just long enough to turn around. Her response was calm, but every word landed with unmistakable force. You had 30 minutes to talk about those things. You chose to spend them trying to get me to criticize other artists. That was your decision. This is mine." Andy made one last attempt to pull the interview back together. "The audience wants to hear about your music." Chaka didn't miss a beat. "Then you should have asked me about my music. Instead, you wanted old drama. You wanted stories about feuds that never existed. You even questioned whether I'm still relevant, as if 5 decades of work somehow disappeared." Then she looked straight into the camera, speaking directly to everyone watching at home. "I want people to understand how this works. You're invited onto shows like this with promises that you'll get to talk about your work. Then the conversation gets redirected toward controversy because controversy gets attention. They don't chase the art. They chase the headlines." Turning back toward Andy one final time, she delivered the words that would echo long after the cameras stopped rolling. "Do you know the difference between you and me? I've spent my life creating something that can outlive me. Music, art, a legacy. You've spent yours turning conflict into entertainment and making money from other people's pain. Maybe that's worked until now. But one day you'll have to look back at what you've built and decide whether it was really worth it." Without another word, Chaka Khan walked out of the Bravo clubhouse, leaving Andy Cohen standing alone beneath the studio lights, his wine glass still in his hand as the audience sat in complete silence. What happened next changed everything. The remaining minutes of the broadcast never recovered. Andy tried to fill the empty space with nervous jokes and improvised conversation, but the energy in the room had completely vanished. The laughter was gone. The excitement was gone. Everyone understood they had just witnessed something that had never happened before. Chaka Khan hadn't simply left the show. She had taken complete control of the story, refused to play by its rules, and exited entirely on her own terms. Within hours, clips from the confrontation spread across social media at lightning speed. Headlines claimed Chaka Khan had dismantled Andy Cohen on his own stage, and the debate quickly grew far beyond one television interview. Suddenly, people were questioning the ethics of reality television itself. Commentators began discussing whether entertainment built around conflict had finally reached a breaking point. Critics who had spent years questioning Bravo's formula now pointed to this moment as proof that even the biggest personalities could challenge the system. A legendary artist had openly confronted the game while millions watched it happen in real time. Support from across the music world arrived almost immediately. Patti LaBelle shared a heartfelt message, praising her longtime friend, writing that Chaka had been speaking the truth since the early days of her career and reminding everyone that real queens never bow to anyone. Gladys Knight echoed those sentiments, saying the Queen of Funk had reminded the world why some crowns simply cannot be taken away, adding that Chaka had always stood for what she believed in regardless of the personal cost. Stephanie Mills, who had shared the stage with Chaka during the Queen's tour, described her as the same fearless woman she had always known, the one who refused to shrink herself or participate in anything that diminished the people around her. And then came perhaps the most powerful response of all. Mary J. Blige, the very artist Andy had tried to use as the center of controversy, publicly expressed her love and gratitude, saying Chaka had always been honest with her, even when those conversations were difficult, because true mentorship isn't about protecting feelings. It's about helping people grow. She ended by calling Chaka a woman of integrity and thanking her for showing the world what real strength looks like. Even younger generations of artists added their voices. Beyoncé, whom Chaka had previously refused to criticize despite opportunities to do so, shared a childhood photo of herself meeting Chaka backstage at a concert. The caption contained just 2 words: "The Blueprint." It was a simple tribute that said everything. Across the industry, musicians who rarely agreed on anything suddenly spoke with remarkable unity. The message was impossible to miss. Chaka Khan's legacy stood beyond question, and respect for everything she had built reached far beyond one television appearance. As for Andy Cohen, he returned to watch What Happens Live the very next evening as though nothing unusual had occurred. He made a brief joke about fiery guests before quickly shifting to a reality television personality who was happy to play along with the familiar format. But if viewers were paying attention, something felt different. His questions seemed a little more restrained. The games didn't carry quite the same edge. Whether intentional or not, people noticed the subtle change. Critics noticed it too, perhaps, if only for a brief moment. The Queen of Funk had forced one of television's biggest hosts to see his own show through someone else's eyes. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't like the reflection staring back at him. Meanwhile, Chaka Khan continued doing exactly what she had always done. She completed her tour, released her long-awaited album to strong reviews, and kept making music without compromising who she was. She answered to no trends, no headlines, and no one else's expectations. At 73 years old, she wasn't chasing relevance because she had already secured something far more valuable. She was protecting the legacy she had spent a lifetime building, preserving the dignity she had earned through decades of perseverance, and wearing a crown that no controversy could ever take away. Some artists become famous, some become legends, and some queens remain queens forever. What do you think about this unforgettable confrontation? Did Chaka Khan go too far, or did Andy Cohen finally meet someone who refused to play by his rules? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories that keep revealing the moments the cameras could never hide.